Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine, and I'm here today to finish reading Indian No More by Charlene Willing McManis with Traci Sorell. This book is published by Lee and Low Books, and we're going to pick up where we left off with Chapter 22, Living the Dream. If getting a TV and having a full table of food wasn't enough to convince me that we weren't poor anymore, then Christmas that year sure did. A car, John? Really? Mama said, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. Yes, just before Christmas, Daddy brought home a car. It was a brown 1950 Lincoln Club Coupe, complete with working headlights, real tan leather seats, and no rust spots. Kate, Dad said as soon as Mama stood on the porch with her hands on her hips, I need a car to get to work, and we need a car to go shopping. I don't mind taking the bus with Miss Elsie. She's always good company. Well, I mind. Pee-wee and I couldn't wait to climb inside. We opened the back door and sat, winding down the windows and bouncing on the seats. Okay, John, just how much is this going to cost us? Mama asked. Daddy just grinned. Don't worry, trust me, we can afford it. Chitch strolled around the sedan. What's wrong with buying a used truck, she asked. Look around you, Ma. People here don't drive trucks. I leaned out the car window and searched the neighborhood. Daddy was right. Every vehicle on the street was either a Chevy, a Ford, or a Dodge car. Not a truck in sight. In Grand Ronde, trucks ruled. Not only could they handle the muddy roads during the rain season, but they could hold a whole cord of wood for winter. And 2 broken-down trucks could be combined into one running truck. But this was Christmas season. Daddy got his car, Mama got to go shopping for more than 2 days' worth of groceries, Chitch got to explore a fabric store further away, and Pee-wee and I got to see Santa over at Sears. Then, on Christmas morning, Pee-wee and I got more presents than we ever had before. Daddy received a few more tools and 2 short-sleeve white shirts. Daddy bought Mama some Jean Nete perfume, a new dress, and gold clip-on earrings. Chitch got more yarn, quilting squares, needles, and a jacket and skirt set. Pee-wee and I usually got dresses from Chitch, and we did again, but this year they were made from colorful calico cloth. Daddy and Mama gave Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls with doll beds to Pee-wee. I got charcoal and colored pencils with some sketch pads. We both got a deck of cards to share. Hey, Daddy, Pee-wee said, holding up the cards. Now you can teach us poker. Mama just shook her head. Don't you dare, she warned. Daddy just winked at us when she wasn't looking. I remember when we first arrived at 58th Place. Daddy jokingly said moving to LA made us American, that soon we'd be white people and Indian no more. Now I wondered if that all might be coming true. Chapter 23, No Service. Funny how life sometimes answers you sooner than you expect. After Christmas, Daddy drove to work instead of taking the bus. Mama started waitressing Friday and Saturday nights over at Peeking's restaurant. Chitch continued to sew, crochet, and cook. She also taught Pee-wee and me Chinook Wawa words and symbols found in our culture, like we saw in woven into baskets or carved into woods. In other words, life was feeling a little better in Los Angeles. Daddy is taking us all out for dinner tonight, Mama announced in late January. She had taken the night off work. Back in Grand Ronde, we never could have afforded going out for dinner, not even when Mama was working at the local diner. Sitting down for a meal at a restaurant? Wow. Can I order whatever I want? I asked, already dreaming of pork chops smothered in gravy. Let's see what the restaurant serves first, Chitch said, brushing invisible lint from her skirt. Let's see what Tinasman say. Did he say why we were going out? He said he would tell us at the restaurant, Mama replied, putting lipstick on and blotting her lips on a tissue. Just thinking about going out to dinner made Pee-wee and me hungry, but Mama wouldn't let us have a snack in the kitchen. You'll spoil your dinner, she said. The winter sun had already set when Daddy finally arrived home from work. Each of us chose our new clothes from Christmas. Mama twirled around in her multicolored dress and black pumps. Chit had on her navy blue skirt with its matching jacket. Pee-wee and I wore matching store-bought dresses from Sears and colorful ribbons around our long braids. My, Daddy said, do I have the most beautiful girls. Good thing I'm the most handsome devil. We piled inside the Lincoln and sang Jailhouse Rock along with Elvis on the car radio. Daddy drove down West Slauson Avenue. Yellow lights flickered like fireflies from billboards, lampposts, and neon signs. The busy street sounded like rushing water with cars speeding past us. It wasn't long before Daddy was pulling into park behind Sherry's restaurant. Bert from work told me this place has the best steaks around. He said he was opening up the door for Chich and Mama. Oh, we have enough money for steaks? We have enough money to buy the cow, Daddy said, and the potato crop. Mama took his arm and entered the restaurant through its red, leather-padded doors. Sherry's restaurant was super fancy compared to the diner in Grand Ronde. Instead of scratched tables and chairs, red leather benches lined the walls in front of dark wooden tables topped by bright white cloth. Sparkling vases filled with flowers sat at each table. A cascade of shimmering lights drooped down from the ceiling. We walked over the richly patterned carpet that covered the floors. Wow, I said. No one greeted us, so Daddy pointed to an empty booth just a few steps away. We all sat down. I can't wait to see what they serve, Mama said, watching one waitress carrying plates of sizzling sirloins and baked potatoes. Peewee nodded in agreement. You can have anything you like, baby, Daddy said. We're celebrating. He leaned next to Mama. Guess who's a new supervisor? You got a promotion? Mama said, giving him a peck. So soon? What can I say, Daddy said. I'm invaluable, and I smell nice, too. That's because Indians don't sweat, Chich said. Daddy chuckled. Tonight we're rich Americans, Ma. Well, this place looks so expensive. I hope you brought enough money, Chich said, opening her purse and taking out her wallet. I watched as she counted her bills. Put away your money, Ma, Daddy said. I'm taking care of it. While we were waiting for menus from the waitress, Daddy talked about his new position. 4 men now report to me. I might have to work late and on weekends, depending on deadlines. He leaned forward. I even have my own office. Will I have a desk and chair? Peewee asked. Daddy laughed. I hope so. Mama's eyes twinkled, and Chich nodded with approval. Bert, one of the other managers, lives in Westchester, by the way. He said there are some really nice houses for sale. Daddy said. John, buying a bigger house will require a down payment, Mama said, glancing at another waitress passing us by. I have the GI Bill. We can get a mortgage loan without a down payment, Daddy said as he stroked her hand. I don't want to move, I said without being asked. Keith lives on 58th Place, and so do our other friends. We've moved enough already. I expected a scolding, since it was rude to interrupt when adults were talking, but both Mama and Daddy just stared at me. She's right, Chich said, touching my braid. We've moved enough already. Maybe the girls need a little more time to adjust in the city. I smiled. Chich was on my side, though she never gave me the impression that she was happy living on 58th Place or living in the city at all, except when she was helping our neighbors. I glanced around the restaurant. Lots of people were enjoying dinner. Some old, some young, and a few young couples with children. I started thinking about life on the Reds, only to realize that I couldn't remember some of the details. Was I beginning to forget Grand Ronde? Maybe even being an Indian? Daddy, I asked, is there any chance we could go home for a visit, maybe? I didn't like the idea of losing my Indianness. It would be nice to visit John, Mama said, touching his hand, for your mother and the girls. He looked away and sighed. Maybe we can drive up in early August when the weather's nice. We all smiled. Waitresses still rushed around us, giving menus to other customers and filling their water glasses and taking their orders. I noticed 2 customers who had arrived after us receive menus. John, try to get the waitress's attention. An older blonde waitress passed our table. Daddy raised his finger to call her to the table, and she stopped. May we have our menus, please? Daddy asked. But the waitress just stood there. She glared at our table and huffed. My face flushed. I rocked back and forth in my seat. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't figure it out. Peewee looked down in her lap. The woman's blue eyes seared into us. She leaned close with her right hand pressed down on the table. She whispered so the other customers didn't hear. I don't think we have anything here you can afford. She straightened and folded her arms. Besides, we don't serve Mexicans here. Mama's eyes widened. Then Daddy straightened up. We're not Mexicans, he replied with a low, firm voice. The white woman pursed her lips. I don't care what you think you are. Our restaurant does not serve your kind here. She was kicking us out. Daddy had money to pay for our meals. He rose from his seat. The waitress backed off with a frightened look. Suddenly, all conversation in the restaurant stopped. I wondered what Daddy would do. Chich motioned for us to get up. Mama stood up next. Daddy helped her with her coat. Anger replaced fear in me. I hated how the white waitress talked to us. I hated everyone's stares. I grabbed my sweater and then I lagged a little behind the others as we walked towards the door. I don't know what got into me. Suddenly I whipped around. "We're not Mexicans," I shouted at her. "We're Indians." Daddy reached back and snatched me by the arm, pulling me out through those red leather door. Chapter 24. Indian No More. "Do you think Daddy will come back?" Pee-wee said to Mama. We all wondered the same thing, sitting around that rusty kitchen table. Pee-wee and I munched on a bologna sandwich while Mama and Chich sipped coffee. Daddy had dropped us in front of the house without a word. His gray eyes burned, his mouth twitched. He'd waited until we were on the sidewalk before he tore off down the street. A few neighbors peeked out from their window. "It's my fault he's mad," I said, lips quivering. "I should never have said anything." "It's not either," Chich said, stroking my head. "The waitress was disrespectful. Your father just needs time to think." "About what?" I said, rubbing a tear from my cheek. "About being Indian, I suppose," Chich said. "No matter how hard he tries, he can't ignore who he is." "Will he ever come back?" Pee-wee cried. "I want my daddy." Mama scooted her chair next to Pee-wee's and hugged her. "Daddy will come back. He'll be here before you know it." "I want to go back home," I cried, wiping my nose on my sleeve. "No one treated us like this in Grand Ronde." "Ah, but if you went just a couple miles south on the other side of the Yamhill River, they would have. Lots of Indian men couldn't get hired to work for whites. And in Portland it was even worse," Chich said. "Some stores there even had signs saying only whites allowed. Your daddy thinks that if he works a bit harder, wears better clothes and lives in a nicer home, and buys expensive stuff, white people will respect him. But he's Indian, we're Indian, and Indians aren't white." "Might as well tell you," Mama said to Chich, lighting up her cigarette. "John confessed that his coworkers call him Chief. It's always been hard for him," Chich said. "Ever since he was a child, he hated being treated differently." Mama hugged Pee-wee and me. "Let's all get to bed. It's late." Pee-wee was deep in dreams next to me, but I couldn't sleep. I worried that Daddy might get so mad that he would go back and yell at the waitress and get in trouble, or just keep driving until he was back in Grand Ronde without us. I thought about home and how things were different there. No, we didn't have a television set, and no, Daddy didn't have a job that paid good money, but he always came home happy to see us. He told jokes, teased Mama, and played with this girl. Once he even let me paint his toenails with my watercolors. Before long, I drifted off to memories of running through the fields of Grand Ronde with Daddy chasing me. Early in the morning, a door slammed. I bolted up in bed, so did Chich. Pee-wee mumbled but remained asleep. There was a bang against the couch and sudden cursing. Feet shuffled on the wooden floor. The overhead light turned on in the living room. "Kate!" Daddy yelled. "Oh no," Chich said. She flipped off her quilt. "You stay in bed." I sat still. She wrapped her bathrobe over her nightgown and left. Then I crept out of bed and peeked out the door. Daddy staggered about, almost tripping over Chich's sewing machine. He shook his head as he forced his eyes to focus. "Kate!" Mama came from the kitchen wearing her favorite red flannel nightgown. She scowled. "You're drunk. Come to bed before you wake the girls." "What?" "They need to wake up," Daddy shouted. "They need to listen." I saw him strolling over to our bedroom. "Tennisman, no," Chich said from just outside our bedroom door. I stepped back, hugging myself. I didn't know what Daddy was going to do. He passed Chich and stood in the now open doorway, swaying back and forth. "Get your sister up." I did what he said. Pee-wee wasn't too happy with me waking her up, but she quickly obeyed when she heard Daddy yelling. "We're Americans, damn it!" His words slurred. "We're not from another country. Hell, I'm a United States veteran." "Please lower your voice," Mama spoke gently as she could. "Girls, go back to our bed right now. John, let's go. We can talk about this in the morning." "I want to talk about it now." Daddy staggered back over to Pee-wee and me huddled together. His breath smelled like beer. "Girls, you might as well know, if you're Indian, you'll never get anywhere. Y'all listening?" Pee-wee let out a small cry. I nodded, clinging closer to her. "John," said firmly, the first time I'd ever heard her use his given name. "Go to bed. The girls are Indian. You can't change that." "I can't, huh? Well, I'm not going to sit here like you and fill their heads with old stories about the past." Daddy suddenly gripped my arm and dragged me over to Chich's sewing table. My eyes widened. I'd never seen Daddy act like this. He found the sewing scissors and held them up. "You can't make them Indian anymore. We're terminated. We're dead. You understand that? They're American." Daddy pulled the hair from the left side of my head. He stretched it out. His other hand held the scissors. Then he snipped. Now she's American. He let my hair go. It spread all over the floor. Dead. I stared, stunned. No one moved. Pee-wee shrieked. Terrified of being the next victim, she scrabbled into the dark kitchen, dove under the table, and bawled, "Don't let Daddy get me. Please don't let him hurt me." "John, what have you done?" Mama shouted in Portuguese at him with her hands flying, sobbing between words. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I trembled uncontrollably. My heart pounded loudly in my ears. I had never felt this kind of anger before. I whipped myself around to face him. "I hate you!" I punched him in the stomach. I pushed him away from me. I screamed again, "I hate you!" I did hate him. If I could find all the words right then. I couldn't find all the words right then, but I hated him for cutting my hair, for not standing up to the waitress, for not standing up to the Indian agent back home, for not standing up to the government that terminated us. "Stop," Chich said, standing by the TV. "John, you've done enough. Go to bed." After a few moments' pause, Daddy obeyed Chich without argument. Mama scooped Pee-wee up from under the table and carried her to our bed, where they laid down together. Chich hugged me and looked me in the eyes, silently telling me to be brave. Then she sat me down on one of the kitchen chairs and draped a towel around my shoulders. I could hear Daddy already snoring. Chich took the same scissors and assessed the damage. Then she snipped long strands off the other side of my head. She held them in her hands. I worked hard not to cry, gulping in air. When she finished making both sides even, my hair barely touched my ears. That night, I became Indian no more. Chapter 25, Beaver. Chich prepared hot oatmeal with raisins for breakfast the next morning. Usually Pee-wee and I slept in on Saturday mornings before enjoying our breakfast while watching cartoons. But not this morning. I said nothing and Pee-wee didn't either. Chich was fixing coffee when suddenly her face crunched up. She touched her side, grimacing. Mama saw it too. "Are you all right?" she asked. Chich's expression changed. "I'm fine," she said. She attempted a smile and turned towards me. "Do you want to greet the day?" I shook my head. I wasn't Indian anymore. Why do Indian things? Pee-wee headed over to Addie's house while I plopped down on the porch steps, pulled my old blue sweater over my knees and tucked my face between them. I had no plans to see anyone. I kept pulling on my cropped hair, hoping it would make it longer. A voice startled me. "You look like Mo from the Three Stooges." Keith sat down beside me. I tucked my head further down in my lap. "Shut up." "What happened?" I didn't answer. "Why did you cut your hair?" I still didn't answer. He sat down next to me. "Was it your mom's idea?" I lifted my head, giving Keith a look. "If you must know, my dad decided it was time to make me American. Like being American is so much better." We sat there in silence for a minute. I was determined not to cry in front of him. He put his hand on my back and changed the subject. "Philip is working on his magic kit that he got back at Christmas. Want to come over and see his new tricks?" "Not really. I look like a boy now." "You don't look like a boy. It just looks different. Come on, no one will tease you. I'll make sure of it." Keith was ready to defend me if anyone teased me. I appreciated that, but I knew he didn't understand completely. I'd lost my hair. I'd lost my heritage. I told Daddy I hated him. I reburied my head in my lap. At Keith's urging, I finally agreed to go to Philip's house. I still hated my haircut and the fact that I didn't look Indian anymore. I turned up the steps to let Mama know where I was going, but I saw her opening the door. "Something's wrong with Chich. She's complaining about her stomach." Chich has never really been sick before, except for the one time her heart fluttered really bad back home. After the res doctor gave her those little white pills to dissolve under her tongue, she hadn't gotten sick like that. But the look on Mama's face said everything. "I'll go get Mrs. Hernandez," Keith shouted as he sprinted down the street. I flew inside. Chich moaned softly from that stained government couch, clutching her side. Her face was red, her eyes squinted in pain. I plopped down a little too quickly next to her. She winced. "Sorry," I said, getting up. "No, it's okay," Chich said, patting for me to sit again. I slowly sat next to her, not knowing what to do. Mama gave me a wet washcloth to place over Chich's forehead. "That feels good," she said. I smiled slightly. Mrs. Hernandez entered our house with her doctor's bag, and Philip, Anthony, and Keith by her side. I moved to the edge of the couch so that Mrs. Hernandez could reach Chich. She rummaged in her bag and pulled out a thermometer. Mrs. Hernandez took Chich's temperature and felt her wrist. When Mrs. Hernandez pressed Chich's stomach, she cried out. "Get some ice in a bag," Mrs. Hernandez ordered Mama. Mama returned with the ice. "Regina, hold the bag here," Mrs. Hernandez said. She pointed to Chip's lower abdomen. Chich asked for some water. "No, Miss Petite," Miss Hernandez said. "It's best not to drink anything right now." She took Mama aside. "She needs to go to the hospital. I believe it's her appendix." Then she turned to Philip and said, "Señora Elise tiene teléfono. Corra y pídale que llame la ambulancia. Rapido." I stayed with Chich while Philip sprinted out the door to have Miss Elsie call the ambulance. Mama started putting things in her purse. Mrs. Hernandez continued monitoring Chich's temperature. Soon Miss Elsie, Pee-wee, and the rest of the gang came over. Pee-wee ran into Mama's arms. Daddy appeared in the kitchen door, still in last night's shirts and trousers. "What's going on?" he said. "Why is everyone here?" Mama walked into the kitchen, explaining Chich's condition to Daddy. Chich patted my hand. "Regina, tell me a story. Stories have power." "Which one?" "The one about the beaver and the coyote." "I don't know it that well." Water welled up in my eyes. "What if I tell it wrong?" Chich smiled. "You won't." I took a deep breath. My eyes darted around. Miss Elsie shooed the kids outside. Mama and Daddy now spoke quietly in the corner. Mrs. Hernandez took Chich's temperature again. I cleared my throat. "There once was a beaver that lived in a simple pond," I started. "Even though it was simple, Beaver thought his home was perfect." "Her temperature is rising. Now 103 degrees, Mrs. Hernandez announced. One day," I went on, "Coyote came and said, 'Beaver, I know of a better pond.'" "Oh," moaned Chich, clutching her right side. "Beaver, the pond that I speak of has water so clear you can see the bottom. There are many plants, more than you can possibly eat. I can take you to it if you want me to." "The girls won't be able to come to the hospital," Mama said to Elsie. Beaver's wife told him, "Do not go with Coyote. Our home is perfect for us." "They can come over to my house," Miss Elsie replied. "The kids can play." But Beaver followed Coyote to see this more perfect place. Sirens blared down our street and stopped in front of our house. I continued, trying to talk faster. Beaver followed Coyote past the mountains and valleys, past the hills and rocks. So far did Beaver walk that he couldn't remember where his home was. At that moment, Coyote turned to eat Beaver, but Beaver quickly dug up a river from the ground and swam away. "Regina, you need to move, sweetheart," Mama urged. I continued the story. Beaver got away from Coyote. 2 men dressed in white jackets had entered and headed towards Chich and me on the couch. He didn't know where he was. Beaver searched everywhere for his simple pond. "Hi there, mind if I check your grandmother?" I asked one man, trying to place himself between me and Chich. "I need to finish the story," I said, holding on to Chich's story. She nodded for me to continue. "And to this day, beavers move from pond to pond trying to find that perfect home Beaver left behind." "Thank you," Chich said. "Okay, Regina, you finished. Let this man take care of Chich," Daddy said as he gently moved me away. Mrs. Hernandez explained what she'd observed to the second man. He nodded. "You a doctor?" "Yes." The first man took Chich's temperature again and held her wrist. Then he touched her stomach. She cried out. "You're hurting her," I said. Daddy held me back. "She's in good hands, Regina." "Don't hurt her," I yelled. The 2 men lifted Chich into a gurney and we all followed as they carried her to the ambulance outside. Most of our block on 58th Place watched the men in the white jackets place her inside. Mrs. Hernandez gave Mama a hug and gathered Philip and Anthony to walk home. Miss Elsie held Addie and Pee-wee's hands as they stood on the lawn. Pee-wee whimpered. "It's going to be all right," Miss Elsie said to Pee-wee. I glanced at Keith from the porch, my cheeks damp, my breath heavy. "Mama said you're coming to our house," Keith said, as he jumped up next to me. I just nodded and wiped my eyes to see Daddy help Mama into the car. The ambulance drove off with a siren blaring. Daddy followed. Miss Keith shuffled his feet, then he draped his arm around me. I tried to hold back more tears. "Come on, Regina, let's go." Later on, Miss Elsie got the call from Daddy at the hospital. Chich had died. Not from her appendix. The doctor had told Daddy that surgery had gone well. But right after that, her heart came out. No one at the hospital knew about Chich's little white pills that she took for it. And I couldn't help but wondering if Daddy cutting my hair had taken Chich away from us. Chapter 26. Umpqua Always. When Daddy and Mama got back from the hospital, our friends in the neighborhood gathered at our house. Elsie comforted Mama. Then she hugged me and Pee-wee tight and cried with us and told us how Chich went to heaven. Keith didn't know what to say. He stood in silence, rocking slowly back and forth on his heels. Addie went over to hug Pee-wee, wailing with her. Mr. Hernandez and Mr. Bates stood by the television, talking in lowered voices with Daddy. Neighbors started bringing us food. Mrs. Hernandez brought over ropa vieja. Even Mrs. Gardner, who pretty much kept to herself, came over with streuselkuchen. Everyone seemed to feel as awful as we did. Not quite 2 days later, I heard a loud sound rattling outside. I ran to the window and saw Cousin Harlan's pickup truck in front of our house. Clad in a plaid shirt, faded blue jeans, and logging boots, he jumped out quickly to help Aunt Rosie get out of the cab. They gathered food out of the pickup bed and headed for the front porch. I ran out to help. "From your family," Cousin Harlan said to Daddy, handing over the bags as soon as they came up to the front porch. "Figured you needed some real food." Daddy took the rest of the bags and handed one to Pee-wee as we went back in. The three of us set them on the kitchen table and peeked inside. Jars of huckleberry jam sat among the dried salmon and deer meat. Cousin Harlan hugged Daddy for a long time. Mama hugged Aunt Rosie, then Pee-wee and I got hugs from both of them. Aunt Rosie didn't waste any time. "You need to bury her in Grand Ronde," she said directly to Daddy. "We can't afford the expense of having her sent up there," he said matter-of-factly. "She has to be buried here." "Then her spirit will wander." Cousin Harlan cut in. "I could just wrap her up and throw her in the back of the pickup. No one would have to know," he offered. "Seriously, Cuz, we can take her home." Daddy had a slight smirk. Cousin Harlan always knew how to light up a situation. "You need to bury her in Grand Ronde," Aunt Rosie said again. "Her spirit will wander if you don't." Daddy had already gone to St. John's Catholic Church, where we had attended Christmas Mass to arrange Chich's funeral. I had heard him talking to Mama about figuring out a burial site in Inglewood. "The funeral Mass has already been arranged for tomorrow," Daddy said, "and it costs too much money to take her home." Aunt Rosie studied Daddy. "I don't know what's come over you, but we're your family. We're here to help. Once you're from Grand Ronde, you're always from there, no matter where you live, how far away you go. Now, we'll have the funeral Mass tomorrow, but then she needs to come home. Our cemetery is still ours. That's where she belongs." Daddy didn't respond, but I could see him mulling it over. A knock at the door interrupted our discussion. Mrs. Hernandez was back to take us girls over to St. John's to pray for Chich. When we got up to the altar, I pushed a penny into the box next to the row of candles, picked up a stick, and lit a tiny candle. Pee-wee and I stood nearby as Mrs. Hernandez knelt and said her prayer in Spanish. After we got back, Keith stood outside our house. "So are you going back home?" "Mom says you are." I just stared at him, not sure what Miss Elsie and Mama had talked about. "I am home," I said. "Chich is gone. Even if we get to take her home, how could I ever stay there by myself?" As soon as I had said it, I knew it was true. 58th Place had to be home, at least for now. I was no longer dreaming of Spirit Mountain every day, or playing with my cousins at Yamhill Field. No sense in dreaming of something other that couldn't come true. Now there was no one to continue teaching me about how to be Umpqua. I felt numb and incredibly lost. That feeling continued through the funeral Mass the next day, and back at our house where everyone gathered to eat. Mama and Aunt Rosie cooked some of the food. We served venison stew, Portuguese bread with blackberry jam, and sausage. Miss Elsie brought over a baked ham and sweet potatoes. Mrs. Hernandez brought over arroz con pollo. And Peking Restaurant delivered a lot of food, too. The adults sat down at the house, talking and eating. Us kids ended up taking our plates and sitting outside on the front porch, but I couldn't eat anything. By the time the sky grew dark, everyone headed home. We were all exhausted. I brushed my short hair and crawled into bed with Pee-wee. Aunt Rosie slept in Chitch's bed. Sometime in the middle of the night, the front door lock jiggled. I lifted my head to listen. After a few minutes, the door opened. Footsteps staggered through the living room into the kitchen. Deep mumbling echoed. Something crashed in the kitchen. Some cursing. Then the back door slammed. Curious, I slid off my bed. I crept through the dark living room and into the kitchen. Quietly flipping the upturned chair upright, I scooted over to the window. Then I knelt on the seat and pulled away the curtain to peer outside. The full moon shone down. Scattered toys in the garden hose sparkled under its light. The walnut tree glowed. Daddy was standing there with his arms at his side and his head down in the middle of the lawn. He was saying something. Is he praying? I strained to listen. A song traveled from the backyard, a familiar song. Daddy sang and moved to the beat of the song. He stepped twice on each foot, his arms extended out. He twirled. He danced like they did back home, the old way. You should be in bed. I rolled around. Cousin Harlan stood behind me, the scent of beer faint on his funeral suit. I hadn't heard him come inside. I went back to watching Daddy from the kitchen window. I didn't know that Daddy knew the honor song. Of course he knows the honor song, Cousin Harlan said as he peered over my head. He's Indian, after all. We'll always be Indian, no matter how hard some of us try not to be. I want to stay Indian, I said. You will. But I don't have the res to go back to. And I don't have Chich. I don't have my tribal number. So? So those things make you Indian. Regina, you were born Indian. Our family is Umpqua. Nothing changes that. Not the government, not these city people, not even that old waitress who wouldn't serve you. Daddy must have told him about that. I glanced at the backyard. Daddy was still singing and dancing. I think I'll join him, Cousin Harlan said, hanging his black jacket over one of the chairs and walking by the back door. By the way, we're all taking your Chich home tomorrow, and your mama's going to have a baby. Then he opened the door and winked at me and left. Wait, we're really going to take Chich home? And Mama's going to have a baby? I wonder if Chich had known. I stared out the window. Cousin Harlan and Daddy moved to the beat of their song, wailing in unison. Hopefully we could still have the traditional giveaway and all the singing for Chich, like we did for Chup. And Chich was right. We came from survivors. Our ancestors survived being forced to leave our homelands and march to Grand Ronde in the winter. Her mother overcame the loneliness and abuse in boarding school to return home and grow her own family. We had left Grand Ronde with 5 family members, and in the end we'd still be 5. I stared out the window again. Daddy was an Indian. He wasn't hiding his heritage. He wasn't pretending to be something else. He knew Chich needed to go home and decided to make it happen. And I knew when we returned, Daddy would drive to work wearing his black pants and tie, believing he would be accepted someday. But tonight, I thought about all I'd been through. What had Chich once said? All that you experience, whether lost or won, was yours. I was an Indian even without my braids. I was an Indian even if I didn't own a headdress or a pony. I was an Indian even if I was Indian no more, because I knew where I came from, because I knew my Umpqua ancestors, because I survived to tell their stories and mine, like this one. And that is the end of that book. There's a few things in the back that I want to tell you about. So there's a glossary that defines some of the words that we have talked about. And there's also some author's notes. So the author of this book, Charlene Willing McManis, is actually Umpqua tribal heritage herself. And so she wrote a little bit about her life. So this book is not her story, but it is based on her story. You can see some pictures, like here she is with her little sister and some of their friends. And she lived in that same place that she wrote about, 58th place. You can see her and her sister again, as well as her mom with our car and her dad who was in the Navy. And there are even some pictures from the Grand Ronde community. There's also a note in this book from the other author, Traci Sorell, and the editor about why they chose this book and why it's so important to read stories like this. Because these are true stories, even if this isn't exactly the way that it happened to Charlene. This is a real story about real things that happened, and all of the things that she mentioned at the end of the book about people being forced to give up their homes, and the boarding schools, and the tribes being canceled, and people being treated unfairly. That all really happened, and it's important that we know it and that we work to make sure that it doesn't happen anymore. Thank you for listening. I hope you appreciated this story and liked it as much as I did. You can join us next week for another story. Once again, my name is Sarah Mari. I'm one of the librarians at Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon. Bye.